Hi, welcome back. In today's video, I will be talking about how I moved from home, my parents' home, at age 28, and how did that look for me. So in Black culture, it is common, but it's not the norm for everyone that parents have the expectation that you leave their home once you turn 18. But the reality is a lot of these people leave home ill-equipped. They don't know how to manage a household, let alone finances. They don't have a job to sustain them. They don't understand the housing market. They don't leave equipped. So you see them kind of go down this path of figuring it out as they go, learn it as they go, versus having the luxury to learn in a environment of your parents' home. So for me, I stayed home up until age 28, and I was well prepared in my eyes. So what that looked like was once I turned 18, I went on to college. I stayed at home the first 3 years of college and the last year on campus. And I worked at Target during my school breaks, and my refund money that I got, I saved it. And so that allowed me to have book money between my Target job and my refund checks. I had book money all the time, and I also had pocket money. And so, that took, one less thing my parents have to think about, and my tuition was paid for. So then I graduated at age 22, and I don't go on to going into medical school as previously planned, but instead I go into the workforce. And so I started working. I graduated May 2014 from college, and I started my first job, my first full-time job, June 2014. And so my first goal was to get a car. I had never owned a car. I had just gotten my license maybe 2 years prior and never drove. And so my first goal was to save enough money for a down payment. And so I saved enough for a down payment, and my dad pretty much put the rest in on it. And what I did was I wanted a Honda Civic. Now at the time, it was a 2015 Honda Civic. And those cars were everywhere. Like once I seen it once, I was like, I like that car. And I would see it everywhere. And so, I save. And then once I saved maybe like $2,000 on my own, then me and my dad went to the Honda dealership, and I got my first car. And so for me, it was fortunate for me. This particular dealership had a program where if you were a recent college graduate, that you are able to finance the vehicle with no cosign, with no credit history or anything, which was perfect because I had not had credit up until that point. And this allowed me to finance the car on my own, not having to ask my parents to do it. And it also allowed me to get it at a really good interest rate. I think I was at like a 5% interest rate. Now that's really good. I know it could be on the higher side. I don't know. I know 7% is pretty high to finance a car, or anything. But I think I had it at 5%, and I was able to get my first car, and that just unlocked a level of independence that I didn't have. So in the meantime, between age 22 to age 28, I stayed home. I lived at home. I continued to live in my parents' home, and I saved up every extra dollar I had. So the only thing I had to take care of was my car note, my car insurance, and then like money to my parents. So I think I was paying them a few $100s a month, So but that was way cheaper than if I would have been on my own. So any extra money I had, I saved it. I saved it so aggressively. So by the time I moved out, I had saved like $15,000 in those, what, 6 years. I had saved $15,000 because, I was researching about buying a house because I did not want to get an apartment, and I was researching on how to buy a house and how much money you would need up front, like down payments and things like that. So with knowing nothing else about buying a house, I was like, I need to save a lot of money, right? I need to have a pretty nice cash flow. So, but in the midst of these years, I, still enjoyed myself. I still hung out with friends. I took the opportunity to go traveling and go different places and see different things too, because I had, I guess the lack of better words, I had more disposable income since I wasn't taking care of a household. And so, I went to San Francisco, I went to Atlanta, I went to Dallas, I went to Orlando, Florida, I went to, what's that place? I went to Pensacola, I went to Houston, I did all that, in that span of time, right? And I enjoyed myself and I saved money, and that's what I did. I took advantage of living at home with my parents and giving myself as much of a head start as I could. Now I know that's not everyone's reality, but I would say if you are afforded the opportunity to live in your parents' home beyond age 18, I say you capitalize off that. You get a job, you create revenue. If you want to create businesses, you do all that stuff where you have a cushion. So if something happens, if you start this new business venture, you have time to really make it profitable because the pressure is not there to hurry up and make profitable so I can then live off this income. So I say definitely take advantage of it. And by 2019, that was my year where I was like, I need to start cleaning up my spending habits and start taking a first-time home buyers class, and kind of taking my last string of trips and getting my car paid off, because I wanted to go into buying a house with no debt, nothing on my, nothing that I owe, so I can better my chances of getting a really good interest rate, right? And so January 2019 come, I went to Atlanta. It was my first solo trip. That was a pretty big step. I went to Atlanta, and then April I went to Dallas, and then October I went to Orlando, and then that December was my last trip before I started the process of buying a house, as far as making sure my bank documents didn't have any traces of any reckless spending, that it showed that I was paying my bills and my bills coming out, and the money I did have was going into this savings. So it pretty much showed me as being a very financially responsible person, right? So I can better my chances. And then September 2019, I took a first-time home buyers class, and it was offered to me by my parish or your county. It's a free class. Different states may offer it in different settings. Like, I had to physically go to the classes. It was I think it was a week long, but it was like 2 hours over the span of maybe 3 or 4 days. I know there are certain states where their home buyer classes is completely online, so you literally are able to do it at your own pace. So I completed that, and pretty much that home buyers class takes you from beginning to end. It takes you on how to find, like the fact you find a real estate agent. You do not pay for a real estate agent. A real estate agent does not get paid until you purchase or sell the property, right? So pretty much, if the real estate agent is not working out, you can change real estate agents, right? And it takes you through home inspections, what kind of home inspections you need to have and why you need to have it. And it go through like what your finances should look like, what you should be providing for the bank, like the order in which you should be going about the home buyer process. I think typically they tell you to get pre-approved first, so you know how much house you can afford, or based on your income. And then next you go find a real estate agent, then you go find a property, and then you get the inspections. They appraise it to make sure that the house is to verify how much the house is valued at, so that you aren't paying more than what the house is worth, right? So you go through all of that, and then you go to closing. It tells you about the closing process. It tells you about all of the types of loans that you can get to purchase a house. So they have 3 of them. So there's a VA loan. So if you are in the military, you can qualify for the VA loan, and pretty much the house has to be in move-in condition. I only know that because my father was in the military and explored that option. But the house has to be move-in ready. It cannot have any repairs that needs to be done to that, and you can get that loan at 0%. And then there's the USDA loan that you can, not get at 0%. You have a 0% down payment, so you don't have to pay a down payment, right? And so that's the same with the USDA loan. There's no down payment, and the only caveat to it is you have to purchase a house in what is deemed a rural area. So no urban area, no big cities, you can't use this loan there. So like the outskirts, the suburban areas, you can use it in there. And you really want to see like what is technically city limits, because sometimes you may have a bigger city and then there's a smaller city that's right outside of it that is a corporated city that you may think is rural, but is corporated. Is corporated, right? So, and then the last one is the most common one, the FHA loan, and that one you have to put 3.5% down. So I know for me, when I was buying it, I didn't register that there was a down payment and then there's closing costs. So you have to account for all of that. So a down payment is the money you put down that goes towards your mortgage. And then the closing costs takes care of all of the things that's dealing with finalizing the property, getting everything switched over and processed. It's processed like from the titles and everything that goes on behind closed doors to pretty much transition this house from one person to the next person. And then the other thing you do pay when you first put in an offer for the house, you put down what is called earnest money. So pretty much that's basically saying, hey, I put in this offer and I'm putting this money down to show you that I'm serious about buying this property. I really want this property. And then, so you have 3 things you have to think about. You have the earnest money, which mine was $1,000, and then you have the down payment. So if you do a VA or a USDA loan, you don't have to worry about the down payment. But if you do a FHA loan, you have to worry about the 3.5%. And then you have to include your closing costs. They have places online where you can kind of get a rough estimate on how much closing cost is. And in my case, I was actually able to get the sellers to cover my closing costs. So what happened leading up to, I had watched enough where, and took the class where I did hear the ideal of, the seller paying your closing costs. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I definitely want to explore that option, right? And the cool thing about it is you don't have to do any negotiation. You tell your realtor what you want to communicate, and then they will communicate it to the realtor of the seller. I've never purchased anything where a real estate agent wasn't involved. So I imagine if you're acting in the place of a real estate agent and you're doing a deal that way, like you're not using a real estate agent, I would imagine you would have to be doing that negotiation. But for me, I communicated to my real estate agent that, hey, can you ask for them to pay for the closing costs? My real estate agent told me, I don't think they're going to do that. But I was like, ask, you know what I'm saying? And that's the thing about anything. You have to think about people they're experts in doing this because they've done it more than you to know, how things go. But these people are not your advocate. They get paid regardless. They get paid regardless if you get a crappy house, if you get a beautiful house, or if you get a house you can't afford. They get paid at the end of the day once that transaction goes through. So you are using them. Now, I'm not saying all real estate agents are like this, but for anything, you have to advocate for yourself. If I had said, oh, okay, well, we're not gonna bother asking them, I would have paid for my closing costs. But I asked him to ask, and he asked, and they agreed to pay my closing costs. And in addition to that, there was some minor things that needed to be repaired based on a home inspection. And I was like, hey, would you all be willing to fix this stuff before I move in? And they said no, but they gave me like $500 to go towards those things. So if you don't ask, you can be leaving money on the table, and you can essentially not know about things that are within right available to you. So I asked, and they paid for the closing costs. They even gave me some money to go towards the minor repairs. It was like a few things, like some of the plugs had to be grounded because it hadn't been stuff. It was minor stuff. It wasn't any foundation issue, no plumbing issue, no structure issue to this property. So what else? And then and then you have to account for having to pay for a home inspection and what they call it, like an inspection of the plumbing. I can't remember what it's called. So you want to get both, because the home inspectors, they don't go and check the plumbing that's underneath the house. They just check everything that they can physically see in the house. Now, there may be signs of bad plumbing when they do their inspection, but they're not going in depth to actually check the pipes that's underneath the house. And that was the thing that you have to account for to pay out, right? And then once I got to closing, I initiated everything March 2020. Yes, I bought a house in a pandemic, right? The beginning of it in the United States, right? And I was able to close on my house a month later. And then once I got to the closing date, I went in there, signed all my paperwork. For some reason, the earnest money didn't work out with them being able to, I guess, configure it, and they gave me my money back. So I was able to buy my house with no out-of-pocket money besides inspection. So I didn't have to pay a down payment, no closing costs, and I got my earnest money back. So it's ways to do things. And another thing that I think really helped me was, instead of financing through a bank, I actually financed through a mortgage company. So, pretty much my understanding is you kind of going through a mortgage company, you cut out the middleman, which is the bank. And because I was I was just having issues with the bank. I went to maybe 5 banks, and like the days I went, there was like nobody to speak to, and they really didn't do a good job of trying to follow up with me. And then, or they just gave me paperwork to fill out, and it was like, here, and we'll get back to you. It was like impersonal, and I'm like, there's no conversation about how this is going to work or anything. But I found this mortgage company, and I loved it. The lady that worked with me, and then everybody who worked within that mortgage company, was very informative. They took me through the steps. They gave me advice. They told me, I was approved for twice the amount that I brought my house for. But they was like, tell your real estate agent that you got approved for less than that. Because what they'll do is they'll try to push you into a bigger house, because that means they get a bigger commission, because they get 3.5% of the house. So if I'm buying a more expensive house, that means they getting a bigger paycheck, So I really like how as a first-time home buyer, they really educated me, and I understood a lot of what I was getting myself into as far as how the process goes, because they educated me. And I was like, I need to get a pre-approval, and I gave them all my paperwork, and they gave me the pre-approval. And then when it came time to close up everything, they didn't have to go back and reprocess my credit or anything. They did it one time, one and done. And that was the process of how I moved out from my parents' home into my own home. And I was adamant I did not want to live in an apartment. I wanted a house that was mine. And yeah, that was my process. And then once I decided, hey, it's go time, I gave myself a timeline and say by March 1st, I'm starting the process. Like as far as doing all my paperwork, getting all my paperwork out there, like getting my pre-approval and everything. I'm like, it's go time March 1st. So once January 1st hit of 2020, I wasn't spending recklessly or unnecessarily. I, continued to save money, and then December I paid off the balance of my car note, which was like 2 years early than when I had financed it. So I went into 2020 debt free, and I basically was building that credible history of finances, because usually they ask you for 2 months. They ask you for 2 months of your bank statements, and then they ask you for a month of check stubs, and then of course they run a credit report and everything like that. And I think that may be it. They ask you for all the information, and they go through everything, go through the numbers, and then they come back to you with amount that they will pre-approve you for. And a lot of this is the process, but since 2008, the housing market has really gotten really strict about making sure that you can afford that house that you are buying, because that's a lot of what happened with the crash of the stock market. People were, essentially giving houses to people who could not afford it, and they just went under with the economy and things like that. So the housing market is pretty tight with making sure that they're not going to pre-approve you for anything that you cannot afford on paper based on your income. And I would say it is an easier process to get pre-approved for a house loan with a W-2 job. It's harder with self-employed, because they want to see that you have consistent job history that would make sure that you can pay that loan. And then also, usually I don't know if it's so much common today, but the big thing was it not to like to make sure you were on your job for the last 2 years, or at least in the industry. So if you were a nurse, at least have a track record that, you've been a nurse for at least 2 years, or you work for X company for at least 2 years, or at least somewhere in the industry where it shows that you keep steady employment and there's no issue with you being able to pay the house that way either. So I think that is all I have. Oh, and then since I didn't have to pretty much pay for anything when buying my first home, I was able to use some of that money to actually furnish my house and, buy my sofa and beds and stuff like that. So it really worked out because I saved that money, and even after I brought all the, furnished my house and everything, I still had a large amount of money where, I had a little nice security. So that is all. I hope this found you well. And, I'm not a parent as of yet, but I would encourage parents, if you can afford to, or you have the opportunity to allow your children to stay with you as they're getting introduced into adulthood, please do. Don't do them a disservice and push them out into the world and have them having to learn as they go, make mistakes that they could have avoided. And I would say make sure, as parents, just making sure you're having a conversations about finances, or if you don't know, encouraging your children to find out about finances and things of that nature. And then even if your child lives home, they can still get a job, they can still work and build a career that way, and if you won't, if you can't financially keep doing it, you can be like, hey, you can have some type of agreement and work it out that way, so we can always be building stronger leaders in our next generation, because what they always say, the kids are the future. And what we put into them as a community, as family members, as parents, is how they're going to continue to grow and shape into. So we want less adults that have to unlearn things from their childhood and be able to be more stable adults and not menace to society, right? So I hope this video found you well, and I hope that, as a parent, or even as maybe someone who's 28 now, or maybe in that age range, you may find that helpful in your journey. Thank you. Have a blessed day.